Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Library, a Catalogue of Wonders, by Stuart Kells. Narrated by Julian. Preface. More than 20 years ago, when I was a young academic working glumly at a social research institute, one of the university colleges held a lunchtime book sale. As soon as I arrived, I found a smallish, squarish volume handsomely printed in old-fashioned type. The binding was distinctively English, dark blue, straight-grained Morocco, a type of goatskin, the spine boldly gilded and segmented with raised bands in the style of Charles Lewis, the great 19th century bookbinder. The title page revealed the publication date, 1814, and identified the book as Pieces of Ancient Poetry from Unpublished Manuscripts and Scarce Books. I knew ancient meant the reigns of Elizabeth I and James I, and poetry covered a breadth of ballads and verse. Otherwise, the book was a little mystery. Just 2 letters appeared where the author's name should have been, N.Y., nor was the publisher identified. A footnote revealed 96 copies had been printed, plus 6 specials on blue paper. The book in my hands was one of the 6. I turned to the back and read the disposition of the copies. Though the book kept secret its author and publisher, it named Sheepshanks, Peckover, Popple, and the other subscribers who'd agreed in advance to buy a copy, special or otherwise. Several of the listed men were Roxburghs, members of the world's most illustrious and exclusive bibliophile society, Sir Mark Masterman Sykes, a blue copy and a white copy, Archdeacon Francis Wrangham, Sir Francis Freeling, and, enjoying another book purchase before his imminent bankruptcy, George Spencer Churchill, Marquis of Blandford. Here, then, in pristine condition and with exceptional pedigree, was a beautifully made and exceptionally scarce collection of rare texts from the time of Shakespeare. In some quarters, leather-bound books are out of fashion. They are brown books to go with brown furniture. But finding pieces was a perfect life moment, the kind of discovery that explains why bibliophiles spend so many hours at flea markets, bookstalls, car boots, and garage sales. Walking home that day, I looked forward to showing the prize to my fiancée, Fiona. We were living in a tower block that used to be a hotel. Our apartment still had a minibar fridge and a wall-mounted hairdryer. Fiona and I grappled with how best to accommodate our VIP guest. Archival box? Shelf to breathe? Would steam from the kitchenette bother the Morocco? Over the following weeks, I researched pieces, consulting in the Balliol Library at the University of Melbourne, the Dictionary of Anonymous and Pseudonymous Literature, and a 19th century edition of the Dictionary of National Biography. N.Y., it turned out, was John Fry, a young bookseller from Bristol. N and Y are the terminal letters of his first and last names, a common device of ceremonial anonymity. Fry's final book was even less anonymous. It identified its author as J-N, F-Y. Fiona and I saved our money and searched for other Frys. Soon, in our tiny flat, we had the world's best John Fry collection. The Folger Shakespeare Library contained his other works, but not pieces, and we were beginning to appreciate fully our book sale find. In strictly monetary terms, pieces was the most valuable thing we owned, but it was more than an asset we could liquidate if we had to. It became for us a talisman. We'd found the nucleus of our future library. Pieces was also a treasure map and a portal into multiple strands of a bookish life. John Fry admitted Fiona and me into the circle of gentlemen who, during the reign of King George III, preserved rare books and documents from centuries past. He tutored us on the pillars of good bibliographical method and exposed us to the most sublime forms of bibliomania. He introduced us to black lettermen, gilt toppers, rough edgers, tall copyists, broadsiders, Aldusians, Elzevirians, Grangerites, Pasquinaders, and tawny Moroccoites. He initiated us into Elizabethanism and invited us to celebrate the edgy side of Shakespeare's work, and he enlisted us in the search for Shakespeare's missing library. The discovery sparked an epiphany somewhere between On the Road and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. I became a student again, determined to learn everything I needed to become a bookman. Nearby universities offered no degrees in holistic bookmanship. Inspired by Fry and his circle, I improvised my own course, plucking units from literature, psychology, philosophy, art, commerce, curatorship, history, law, logic, mathematics, a mixture that made no sense to anyone but Fiona and me. When eventually I graduated, I walked away with a book about bookselling, a master's in book auctions, a doctorate in law, the untidiest transcript in Christendom, and a bespoke qualification in bibliophilia. On weekends, I started running books, driving around with a car full mostly of paperbacks, wholesaling them between bookshops. Fiona and I issued catalogues of highlights from our stock. Every book we bought to sell was a puzzle, a judgment to be backed. We relished the chance to work with objects, not just ideas. For us, this was the beginning of a career in books that saw us working side by side in a publishing house and issuing with delight a series of books about books. We exhibited at book fairs and sold books to venerated libraries such as the Mitchell, the Houghton, and the Bodleian, whose users must swear not to remove or deface the objects therein, nor to bring or kindle any fire. In the course of our work, we visited hundreds of libraries tidy and chaotic, dry and damp, fragrant and malodorous, welcoming and dangerous, containing nearly every kind of book, loved and neglected, meritorious and meretricious, read and unread. We explored national libraries, workingmen's libraries, subscription libraries, scholarly libraries, corporate libraries, club libraries, plush private libraries, and very modest ones, like the collection of found books amassed by a demolition man in the course of his labours, every volume methodically catalogued and lovingly preserved. We ventured off catalogue to make exhilarating discoveries on library shelves, like mislaid pamphlets, overlooked signatures, legendary variants, extra illustrated rarities, and hidden four-edge paintings. We explored sequestered spaces inside libraries, like the exquisite Shakespeare Room in the State Library of New South Wales, the super-tight spiral staircases deep inside the State Library of Victoria, and the panopticon cavity above the vaulted glass dome of the nearby Parliamentary Library, modelled on the original Reichstag. We studied the crimes of book owners, such as the farmers who stored in a woolshed a priceless set, 41 elephant folio volumes of John Gould's marvellous zoological illustrations, and the farmers' town cousins who stored a unique collection of books and manuscripts in a fireplace. We called on the hoarder who cut an indoor pathway to his bathtub where his most prized possessions were kept, and we swooned over medieval libraries with books shelved spine inward and attached to chains to prevent escape. We learned that libraries are much more than mere accumulations of books. Every library has an atmosphere, even a spirit. Every visit to a library is an encounter with the ethereal phenomena of coherence, beauty, and taste. But libraries are not platonic abstractions or sterile, hyperbaric chambers. They are human places into which humans cry tears, molt hair, slough skin, sneeze snot, and deposit oil from their hands, incidentally the best sustenance for old leather bindings. How much of themselves did Shakespeare, Donne, Hemingway, and Woolfe leave behind in their libraries? And how much of their personalities is discernible from their books? Creating a library is a psychically loaded enterprise. In gathering their bounty, book lovers have displayed anxiety, avarice, envy, fastidiousness, obsession, lust, pride, pretension, narcissism, and agoraphobia. Indeed, every biblical sin and most of the pathologies from the American Psychiatric Association manual. When visitors called on the 17th century Welsh bibliophile Sir William Boothby, he wished they would hurry up and leave. My company is gone, so that now I hope to enjoy myself and books again, which are the true pleasures of my life. All else is but vanity and noise. John Hill Burton described a book collector whose nervous temperament was so sensitive that he could not tolerate an alien book in proximity to his library. The existence within his dwelling place of any book, not of his own special kind, would impart to him the sort of feeling of uneasy horror which a bee is said to feel when an earwig comes into its cell. Collectors, having acquired and arranged their books through whichever means, have used every kind of simile to describe their beloved possessions. Garden flowers, verdant leaves, precious fruit, flowing fountains, ships, houses, bricks, doors, nails, bullets, daggers, scents, elixirs, meteorites, gems, friends, offspring, prisoners, tenants, soldiers, lovers, wraiths, devils, bones, eyes, teeth. John Baxter imagined the books in his Graham Greene collection rustling and rubbing against each other every night like a colony of insects. Libraries provide ideal habitats for real insects which are attracted to quiet, darkish, starchy places. Fiona and I have seen whole shelves of books destroyed by burrowing worms. For me now, the mounds and trails they left behind are the stuff of genuinely horrifying nightmares. We've also seen whole collections ruined by grazing silverfish, the bibliophile's nemesis. Those monsters relish pulpy paper and the crunchy starch in book glue and book cloth. Seemingly preferring richer inks, they devastate dust jackets with tracks that look fiendishly deliberate. From our visits to libraries, we've learned much about the integrity of shelves. Smooth, strong, and open are best. Sagging shelves deform books into painful, non-Euclidean shapes. Abrasive shelves wear away at leather bindings. Books behind glass get sick from breathing their own air. Above all, we've learned that libraries are full of stories. Stories of life and death, lust and loss, keeping faith and breaking faith. Stories of every possible human drama. And via complex, fractal, intergenerational threads, all the stories are connected. Pieces would be the first in a series of marvellous finds, several of which come instantly to mind. Found piled in a bedroom bookcase on an appraisal visit to a suburban home, 2 1625 George Chapman plays, quarto format, in immaculate condition, and bound together by one of the world's finest bookbinders, Riviere and Son. At the bottom of a dusty box in a country bookshop, a pre-revolutionary French royal binding in wonderful condition and with spectacular provenance and rarity. In a second-hand store, Thomas Frognall Dibdin's luxurious catalogue of Lord Spencer's library at Althorpe, the catalogue in which Dibdin glamorized the 1623 edition of Shakespeare's plays, the First Folio. Though John Fry died nearly 2 centuries ago, and though it would be years before I properly understood his work in context, he became my book world mentor, imparting his fascination with the print culture of early modern England. Under his influence, I would write and publish about Shakespeare and join the search for Elizabethan and Jacobean treasures. I would explore the greatest libraries and the infinite byways of bibliomania. All the while, a young bookseller from Bristol, long dead, would be my counsellor and guide. This kind of practical immortality is a large part of why people love books, and why we write them. Infinity. In 1937, at the age of 38, Jorge Luis Borges started his first regular full-time job. The menial and dismal work of recataloguing books at the Miguel Canet Municipal Library in the Boedo district of Buenos Aires. He worked surrounded by violent, lazy and loutish colleagues. Often he would disappear to a quiet part of the library and attempt to write. On the way home each day he walked 10 blocks to the tram line, his eyes filled with tears. In 1938, on Christmas Eve, Borges ran upstairs and accidentally split his head open on a window casement. Elizabeth Hyde-Stevens has described how the wound became poisoned, and Borges spent the next week in a sleepless delirium. Suspended between life and death, he was unable to speak, until his mother brought him back to sentience by reading aloud from a book he'd ordered. On that miraculous day, she looked up from reading C.S. Lewis, noticing he had begun to cry. In perfect speech, he told her, "I'm crying because I understand." One of the first pieces he wrote after his recovery was a short story titled The Library of Babel. Borges called it a nightmare version or magnification of the hellish Miguel Canet Municipal Library. The heart of the story is a remarkable vision of a universe consisting of an infinite library composed of interconnected hexagonal rooms, all the same size, all with bookshelves whose dimensions, 35 books per shelf, 5 shelves per side, 20 shelves per floor, mirrored those of the Miguel Canet. The books themselves are standardized too. Each one is 410 pages long. Each page has 40 lines, each line about 80 letters, which are limited to 22 phonic characters, plus the full stop and the comma and the space. The book's distribution among the hexagons is apparently random, though many theories exist about the distribution and many attempts are made to find patterns in the randomness. Most of the books seem to be gibberish, but the library must contain in every language every book ever written, every book that might ever be written, and every possible version of every one of those books. Detailed histories of the past and the future, faithful and unfaithful catalogues of the library, lost Gospels, commentaries, and Apocrypha. The lost books of Tacitus, the treatise the Venerable Bede might have written, and never wrote, on Saxon mythology. True and false accounts of your death. This metaphor of infinite libraries has been expressed in countless other ways. Every possible combination of musical notes, infinite cabinets of things, the set of possible protein sequences, the set of possible mystery novel plots, tabulations of the secret name of God, the world, nature, and Google as universal libraries. The Bible, the Quran, the First Folio, and Finnegan's Wake as universal texts. Monkeys with typewriters, pan-dimensional cryptographs, automatic writing, continuous narratives, nameless cities, formal depictions of mathematical and quantum indeterminacy, the mare incognitum and terra nullius, the set of all possible tweets. A page of pixels can be used to create not just every page of text, but every image as well. In principle, solids can be sliced into infinitely narrower planes. In Borges's story, the Library of Babel is an endless subject of wonder for the civilizations that have grown up in its rooms and on its stairs. They construct legends and cults, they debate their theories, they explore the vast expanses of the labyrinth, and when driven to despair, they jump to fast, slow deaths in the bottomless air shafts that stand between the hexagons. For 9 unhappy years, Borges remained at the Miguel Gane Library. Partly on the strength of his literary reputation, he would escape to become director of the National Library of Buenos Aires, a position he remained in for 18 happier years. Though he lost his sight in his early 50s, he refused to carry a cane and he continued to work. He also continued to visit bookshops. According to Alberto Manguel, who worked at Lebach's bookshop in Buenos Aires, Borges would pass a hand over the shelves as though his fingers could see the titles. On one visit to Lebach's, Borges was accompanied by his octogenarian mother. The author-librarian searched for medieval English texts. "Oh, Georgie," Signora Borges said, "I don't know why you waste your time with Anglo-Saxon instead of studying something useful like Latin or Greek." Chapter 1. A Library with No Books. Oral Traditions and the Songlines. If a library can be something as simple as an organized collection of texts, then libraries massively predate books in the history of culture. Every country has a tradition of legends, parables, riddles, myths, and chants that existed long before they were written down. Warehoused as memories, these texts passed from generation to generation through dance, gesture, and word of mouth. The Kope of New Guinea, the Mandika griots of Mali, the Ifugao of the Philippines, the Arabs of Palestine, the nomads of Mongolia, the Nambikwara of Brazil, and the Gitxan and Wet'suwet'en of British Columbia. These and other peoples used narrative forms such as Hudhud chants, Hikaye stories, Urtin Du and Bogino Du, long and short songs, to maintain their immaterial libraries. Cultures that lacked any form of writing could only ever preserve their texts imperfectly. Those cultures, though, adopted elaborate techniques, such as intricate patterns of repetition, and rules, such as social obligations and taboos, to maintain as best they could the integrity of their texts. The best examples of mnemonic formulas for preserving oral libraries are from ancient India. Memorizing a single text from the Vedas involved up to 11 forms of recitation, including the Jata Parta, mesh recitation, in which every 2 adjacent words in the text are first recited in their original order, then repeated in reverse order, and finally repeated in the original order. Perhaps the oldest oral library in the world was formed over a span of tens of thousands of years in the arid lands of Central Australia. There, the Arrernte people developed a complex system of tribal knowledge, beliefs, duties, and ethics. What Van Gennep called in his 1906 Mythes et légendes d'Australie, at one and the same time fragments of a catechism, a liturgical manual, a history of civilization, a geography textbook, and a manual of cosmography. Indigenous Australians sometimes refer to this expansive system as their dreaming and their dreaming stories. The stories reflect the bosom connection between the first Australians, their land, and all its features: tors, plateaus, rivers, billabongs, animals, plants, routes for trade and conquest, and the journeys of totemic beings, giant animals and giant people from the primordial past. Travel and geography are so important to the dreaming that the dreaming stories are often called dreaming tracks, or especially among the Arrante, Jurunga lines, a reference to the mysterious Jurunga stones that are vital to Arrante tradition. Rich with sacred meaning, these flat, oblong-shaped stones, about 3 inches wide, are polished and incised with elaborate patterns and designs, concentric circles and meandering lines, dots, arches, and curves, representing the totems of the groups to which the stones belong. Thought by the Arrante to have been made by the ancestors themselves, the Jurungas are a physical counterpart to the Aborigines' oral libraries. Most Jurungas had a central place in love magic, initiation ceremonies, and other ancient rituals. Versions of the stones tied with women's hair can be swung to make a charmed sound and have been called bull roarers and wife callers. When the Jurungas were not being used for sacred purposes, male Arrante elders wrapped them in leaves or bark, hid them in caves, or, when circumstances called for it, carried them overland with great reverence and secrecy. Every dreaming track is inherently multifaceted, blending animate and inanimate entities, past and present, fact and belief, ground and sky. It is, as Nicholas Shakespeare writes, at once a map, a long narrative poem, and the foundation of an Aboriginal's religious and traditional life. It is secret, and there are penalties for those who transgress. Not surprisingly, for a set of concepts that predate writing, the tracks resist simple expression in prose. Nevertheless, the tracks have been the subject of intense scientific and pseudo-scientific study, much of it conducted near Alice Springs at Hermannsburg, a Lutheran mission to the Western Arrernte and Loritja, people of remote central Australia. Geza Roheim, the Hungarian-American Freudian, conducted fieldwork there in 1929 with his wife Ilonka. Freud encouraged and assisted Roheim's work at Hermannsburg, as well as in Melanesia, Somaliland, and Arizona. Roheim subsequently wrote about the Arrernte and Pitjantjatjara people and was applauded as the first ethnologist to interpret culture psychoanalytically. From 1894 to 1922, Karl Streloff was Hermannsburg's Lutheran pastor. During his 28-year calling, he only left Central Australia 3 times. Struck down by dropsy in 1922, he tried to leave a 4th time to seek medical treatment in Adelaide, but only advanced 240 arduous kilometres before the disease claimed his life. He was buried on the route at Horseshoe Bend. His son, Theodore, known as Ted, grew up among the Arrernte and became an anthropologist of sorts. On a disastrous trip to Europe, he felt shunned by the leaders of the field who frowned at his lack of formal training. He returned to Central Australia and continued to study its indigenous people. In a career spanning 4 decades, Ted Streloff undertook fieldwork that was remarkable for its breadth, depth, and fruits. He collected from Arrernte groups some 1,800 objects, most of them sacred, many of them Jurungas. He also collected a library of songs, publishing his analysis of them in his 1971 magnum opus, Songs of Central Australia. The beauty and complexity of the dreaming tracks enchanted Streloff. Attempting to understand them was an epic puzzle, perhaps ultimately impossible, like opening a door in a secret palace and entering a labyrinth of countless corridors and passages. In Songs, Streloff built an elaborate, descriptive and theoretical architecture that linked Arrernte dreaming with the Western literary canon. Rich with analogies from Greek and Norse mythology, the book received a distinctly mixed reception among the few people who read it. Those people described it variously as a treasure trove of poetry, wildly eccentric, and a dense, often bewilderingly literary work. 5 years after Streloff's death, the British author Bruce Chatwin telephoned Ted's widow Kath. Chatwin introduced himself and explained that he had read Songs and wished to buy another copy of the book. Kath replied, "Let me say hello to the first man in the world who's read it." Chatwin had encountered Songs soon after its publication. In 1972, he proposed writing a profile of Streloff for the Sunday Times. This was one of several projects left unfinished when Chatwin shot off to South America to write a travel book. He may have become aware of Strelov's work at an even earlier date. He later claimed to have discussed nomadic art and Strelov with the Australian archaeologist John Mulvaney in 1970. According to Chatwin's version of that conversation, he met Mulvaney at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Oxford. Chatwin suggested the walkabout might be a way to unlock the nature of human restlessness, and Mulvaney pointed him in the direction of Strelov. Mulvaney later confessed to having no memory of this encounter. Either he forgot it completely, or it never took place at all. Chatwin's reaction to songs was unambiguous. He saw Strelov's monolith as perhaps the only book in the world, the only real attempt since the Poetics of Aristotle, to define what song, and with song all language, is. I feel I'm reading Heidegger or Wittgenstein. Strelov's Aranda Traditions, published in 1947, was for Chatwin another 20th century linchpin. You only have to look at the work of Levi-Strauss to realize this. On the strength of his reaction to Strelov's writings, Chatwin travelled to Central Australia in January 1983. He would retrace Ted's footsteps and write a serious study of Arenta culture. Once in Australia, he focused on the Chirunga tracks, which held an irresistible appeal as an Antipodean analogue to Britain's mystical ley lines. Overbrimming with anthropological mystery, the tracks promised to bridge narrative history and prehistoric migration. Chatwin saw in the dreaming tracks something vastly grander than anything else mankind had built. The pyramids are little mud pies in comparison. Chatwin knew something of the ancient world. At the age of 18, straight out of secondary school, he'd joined Sotheby's in London as an assistant porter in the Works of Art department. His job was to dust and move tribal artifacts and European and Oriental pots, tasks he performed poorly. Bruce would wander around where he wanted. When sales went on view, there would be 35 lots missing and things were misnumbered and dirty. Chatwin was nevertheless promoted, working as a junior cataloguer across furniture, modern pictures, and antiquities. As handsome as he was quick-witted, Chatwin feared Sotheby's directors were using him as live bait to ensnare wealthy art owners of both genders. Now in Australia, Chatwin struck a T.E. Lawrence-like pose, a go-anywhere literary adventurer, highly sexed, unafraid of the desert or of snakes. When he returned to England, he appeared on BBC Two alongside Mario Vargas Llosa and, the champion of the literary world's fascination with libraries and mazes, Jorge Luis Borges. Borges was 84, Chatwin 43, and still riding the success of the experimental travel book, In Patagonia, that he'd written while truanting from the Sunday Times. He and Borges had more than one thing in common. As Shakespeare noted in his Chatwin biography, many of the skills Borges acquired through cataloguing books from the Miguel Cane Municipal Library, Bruce picked up in antiquities. Those skills included an understanding of provenance and the ability to juggle masses of detail. The television program was prefaced by a Borgesian parable that resonated with Chatwin's own life and searching. In the parable, a man embarks on a lifelong quest to discover the world. He collects a jumble of images, of provinces, kingdoms, mountains, bays, ships, islands, fish, rooms, instruments, heavenly bodies, horses, and people. Finally, as his death approaches, he realizes that the collection of images has made a composite picture of his own face. Chatwin would make a second trip to Australia in 1984. The results of his work there appeared in 1987 as songlines. The title recalled Strelov's Songs of Central Australia and was Chatwin's word for the labyrinthine Arente dreaming tracks. On one level, the book was simply a travel memoir, and that is how many readers and booksellers received it. Another work in a tweedy genre whose authors were, according to the critic Rory Stewart, celebrated for neither their prose nor their charm. Chatwin, though, had greater ambitions for the book, regarding it as a quintessentially literary work that, like Madame Bovary, blurred the line between fiction and non-fiction, which, anyway, Chatwin argued, was an arbitrary boundary invented by publishers. When the Thomas Cook Travel Award shortlisted the book, Chatwin asked that it be withdrawn from contention. Songlines became a Sunday Times and New York Times bestseller. Hardback sales quickly surpassed 20,000 copies, and Chatwin, in Nicholas Shakespeare's words, strode into the realm of literary respectability. "I can't say I believe the songlines literally," said Colin Thurbron. "Maybe any
Sample complete. Ready to continue?